All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan McManus. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Farm and Institution Specialist with MSU Center for Regional Food Systems. I'm going to be your host for today's short webinar, and you are joining us for the final webinar of our series about the 2020 to 21 10 cents evaluation report. In this series, we cover key findings of the evaluation, including all the interesting and big takeaways from that important year. I do want to note this webinar was originally scheduled as the third episode of the series back in February, but it was canceled and we're now releasing it as a recording. So for the agenda today, first, we'll be providing a quick introduction to how the 10 cents program works in case you aren't familiar with it. And then I'll share the key findings related to all of the different Michigan grown foods served through the program during 2020 to 2021. And then we'll wrap up the day with our guest speaker, Colleen. She's the Farm to Institution Director at MSU Center for Regional Food Systems. And she's going to talk about Michigan's school purchasing of local foods over time. And that's going to provide us a broader context of everything we'll learn. So this program is formally known as 10 cents a meal for Michigan's kids and farms. I'll just be referencing this as 10 cents for the series. It is a competitive state-funded grant, so it's actually written into Michigan's legislature, and it provides schools, early care and education centers, or ECEs, and other organizations participating in any USDA child nutrition program with match funding up to 10 cents per meal to purchase and serve Michigan-grown fruits, vegetables, and dry beans. And those products can be fresh or minimally processed, and that includes products that are chopped, diced, frozen, dried, and so on. The program is implemented by the Michigan Department of Education. They run all of the administrative aspects of the program, like accepting grantees, distributing funds, and managing paperwork. But there are 3 other partners that help with different program areas. And in short, Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities is the outreach and communications partner. Then there's us with the Center for Regional Food Systems. We are the evaluation partner. We make this report every year, and we also help with assistance for local food sourcing among farms, food suppliers, and grantees. And then lastly, there is the Michigan Department of Ag and Rural Development. They are the key partner for agriculture, and they can help producers get connected to the resources they need to sell to grantees. And this program is a matching grant, so it helps double the investment in Michigan grown produce and beans. So a common example we use is if a grantee is awarded a $5,000 grant, they have to commit to spending at least $10,000 towards their local food purchases. And then before I get too far, I wanted to remind us again, I've said this in every webinar, how important and big this year was, just because it sets such an important context for our evaluation findings. First, it was the program's first school year since the start of pandemic in March 2020. So food service settings and operations changed greatly. We saw huge impacts to the supply chain. Second, early care and education sites were eligible to participate for the first time ever. This is a very different kind of grantee than what we had before, which was schools and school districts. We talked about those differences in the second webinar of the series. And then lastly, this was the first year that the program went statewide. In the last pilot year before this one, there were only 57 grantees. And this year it grew to 143 grantees across the state. And all this context shows just how unpredictable things were going into that year with seeing how grantee local food purchasing would play out. And I will say our evaluation findings were very interesting. So using the purchasing information that was collected from invoices that grantees submitted in 2020 to 21, that included thousands of lines of purchasing data. And we also collected information through evaluation surveys that grantees took throughout the year. We found that the majority of purchases, or 70%, were on Michigan grown fruits. And then that was followed by a little less than a third, or 29% of purchases on vegetables. And then just 1% were on dried beans. In fact, only 13% of grantees reported purchasing dry beans that year. And to us, this showed huge potential for growth in dry bean purchases for the future years, especially since Michigan is one of the largest dry bean producers in the country. We also found from our evaluation survey responses that some grantees have this really strong desire to purchase more dry beans for their meals and learn more about how to incorporate them into their food service programs. Now, when it came to the diversity of products, we found that grantees still purchased a wide variety of Michigan grown fruits, vegetables, and dry beans, despite all those new changes I talked about a few slides ago, especially considering all the pandemic related interruptions and supply chain issues. We saw 15 different types of fruits, 34 different types of vegetables, and 9 different varieties of dry beans purchased throughout that year. And on average, grantees purchased 3 different types of fruits and 6 different types of vegetables for their food service programs during 2020 to 21. So you can see in this chart the top 10 foods purchased by grantees. In the light green bars, we can see the top foods ranked by total dollars spent. And apples by far made up the majority of spending by grantees that year. And then that's followed by various types of vegetables and other fruits, which you can see here. In the dark green bars, we can see how popular each food was by the percent of grantees that purchased it during the year. And again, most grantees purchased apples during the year, and then that was followed by different fruits and vegetables. You can see here that was followed by cucumbers, carrots, and green beans. And then on the far right of this slide, you can see our findings when we looked at where grantees purchased the highest diversity of products, or in other words, where did they purchase the greatest variety? And we found that Food Hubs ranked #1 with 41 different types of Michigan grown products purchased that year. And then that was followed by grantees purchasing direct from farms with 35 product types. And then that was followed by broadline distributors with 34 product types. And I did also want to note that while 10 cents a meal can be a great way for grantees to substitute the common fruits, vegetables, and dry beans they already purchase for a Michigan grown source, it can also be a really great way for grantees to experiment and try new foods in their food service programs, or even activities like taste testing. Some of the uncommon types of foods that children were able to taste included Saskatoon berries, microgreens, rutabaga, kohlrabi, and rhubarb. Now on this slide, you can see a snapshot with examples from real grantees, and it really shows that there's a wide variety in the way grantees may have purchased and served Michigan foods on their menus based on the information reported in their invoices. I will say that we found that grantee spending varied widely throughout the year, and there was no evident pattern for spending by season throughout the year. And this could be due to a couple of reasons. There's the varied grant amounts awarded among grantees. We have the seasonality of Michigan agriculture, which can limit products during the year. And yet we also have minimally processed products like frozen or dried foods that can extend the availability of products with those limited growing seasons. We also know that the diversity of food programs across different types of grantees can play a factor. Like, for example, if we have a small early childhood education center, their food program could look very different than a large public school district. And then lastly, I did want to also add that since the 10 cents program this year ran from September through August, not all 10 cents grantees, particularly schools and districts, participated during the summer months because they may be on a seasonal break. But again, you can see here the really wide variety of foods that could have been purchased by the different types of grantees, like the ECE versus a school district versus the grantee like a non-public school. Next, we asked grantees in our evaluation surveys that they took throughout the year, did they try new foods through the 10 cents program, either since the start of the year or the last survey? And if they did, we asked them for a list of what foods they tried. We found that the majority of grantees said yes, 10 cents did allow them to try new Michigan grown foods that they would not have otherwise. And on average, each grantee tried about 5 new Michigan grown foods throughout the year. And in total, grantees collectively reported over 30 types of vegetables, 16 different types of fruits, and 14 grantees tried dry beans for the first time. And on the right, you can see some of the top foods that were tried, and they include apples, asparagus, blueberries, carrots, and cherries. We also asked grantees if there were any foods that they wanted to try but couldn't find or buy. And across the 3 surveys that we asked this question, almost a third or 30% of grantees said yes, there were foods they couldn't find or buy but wanted to. And on average, grantees reported 2 foods each throughout the year. And in total, they collectively reported 29 different types of vegetables, 15 types of fruits, and 9 grantees reported wanting to try dry beans. And on the right, again, you can see some of the top foods they wanted to try, and that included strawberries, cherries, blueberries, peaches, and asparagus. Now, lastly, we did look at the types of market channels that grantees use to purchase the categories of Michigan grown foods. When it came to fruits, almost half of all the purchases came from broadline distributors, and then 30% came from a food hub. It was a similar trend with vegetables, almost half came from broadline and over a third came from food hubs. But dry beans were slightly different in that they were mainly purchased from a food hub, but we also saw grantees purchase them from their broadline distributor and direct from farmers. And these were the dominant channels that grantees used for their purchases. But I will note we did see a wide variety in the types of suppliers overall. And we go into that in more detail in the 4th webinar of this series that explores the 10-cent supply chain. So with that, I'm going to introduce Colleen Matz. She is the Farm to Institution Director here at MSC Center for Regional Food Systems. She's worked in farm to school for quite some time, and I'm going to pass it off to her.
Thank you, Megan. And I wanted to take this time here to add some perspective related to where schools are now with purchasing local foods relative to where they started. So we'll be looking over the years. I wanted to note as we get started here that we're homing in on schools because that's the group that we have the most data for. And we should note that 10 cents grantees include more than schools, but schools certainly make up the largest proportion of grantees. So we're using the 10 cents data as an indicator. And one way that we can see growth over time is through looking at the variety of foods purchased by school food service directors. So here we can take a look at fruits as a category and some specific products within it. So on the left, you'll see the column of fruits that were reported as purchased by school food service directors in a 2013 Michigan Farm to School Census survey. And you can compare that over time where the variety of fruits grows over those years up until this report in 2020 and 2021. So on the right side is the purchases by our 10 cents a meal grantees in that program year. And that includes some fruits that people might not expect, like you mentioned, Megan, rhubarb and Saskatoons included. On the next slide, we can also take a look at specific local foods that have been of interest to food service directors and where they are now with purchasing them. So on the left side here, you'll see interest in specific foods by a percentage of food service directors who responded to a 2004 Michigan Farm to School Census survey. And that was the first survey conducted in the state about farm to school. On the right, you'll see the percentage of 10 cents grantees that purchased these foods in 2020 and 2021. And some products like apples, peppers, cucumbers show that the percentage of grantees purchasing now is almost on par to interest in those foods way back in 2004. But all of these foods are fairly easy to prepare and serve in school meals. So that's an important note here. Apples can be served fresh and whole. Peppers and cucumbers are fairly easy to slice and serve, including on salad bars. So that might be why interest is now almost matched by purchasing. But other foods have farther to go in meeting that initial interest, as you can see from the percentages on the right-hand side, the 10 cents purchasing data. So this might be a real reflection of some true limitations to local food purchasing. That can include the seasonality of some products. Strawberries, for one, are only available for a short window of time from local growers, and the variety of strawberry that's most available in Michigan doesn't transport or last as long as varieties that are grown and shipped in from California. So there are some real seasonal availability limitations on something like strawberries. The availability of other products can be a limitation as well. So grapes grown in Michigan are often going into wine and other processed products. And that's not a product that's grown as widely by Michigan farmers for direct sales to schools like some other products might be. The availability of other products through distribution channels that reach schools is another limitation. So for an example, Michigan farmers produce a whole lot of potatoes, but larger scale potato growers are often selling into processing markets for things like chips and as ingredients in soups and other processed products. So those products aren't as readily going into school markets specifically. And finally, the ability of school food service professionals to process, prepare, and serve some of these foods can be limited as well by more internal limitations like staff labor, skills, equipment. So beyond baked potato bars, processing potatoes in school food service programs can be time intensive. So that might be another reason why a food like potatoes has a bit further to go. So next, you'll see here an even bigger picture. And here we can look at local food purchasing as reported by school food service directors in Michigan over time. And we're looking way back here to 2004 as our starting point. So that was when I mentioned the first farm to school census survey in Michigan was conducted. And that was through a partnership between the Michigan Department of Education and the CS Mott Group for Sustainable Food Systems at MSU, which is now our Center for Regional Food Systems. And in that survey, food service directors were asked about whether they were interested in purchasing local food products and whether they already had. So you can see the responses were quite different then between their activity with local food purchasing versus their interest in local food purchasing. We continued to ask those questions in surveys in 2009 and 2013, and you can see the growth there of activity against interest. So interest grew a bit over time, but that activity has really grown quite a bit between 2004 and 2013. And next here, you can see an even bigger picture over all those 20 years, nearly 20 years. So now that Farm to School has been active and tracked in Michigan for almost that long, this is kind of the broadest picture we have available. And you'll see that food service directors reporting of whether they purchased local foods doesn't follow a straight line up. And that also reflects real ebbs and flows and things like staffing changes, product availability, and other external factors. But we're now seeing that reported activity almost matching up in terms of percentages with the initial interest way back in 2004. So we're in a special place to be able to show that kind of tracking over time. And I did want to share those references that we used for this bit of the presentation in case others are interested in following up on these and might be interested in taking a closer look. And I do want to note that the data we used are different from and separate from the USDA Farm to School census results. I only used Michigan-based and Michigan-led tracking survey results, and those actually predate the USDA's efforts. And also wanted to note that the 2022 survey results are not yet published. So we gave folks a little sneak peek here, but that summary will be coming soon and will be publicly available in the near future. And I'm sure we can let people know when that's ready. I think that's all I have today. Megan, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Colleen, for sharing all the info. Folks, that's a wrap for our final webinar of the series. All of the webinars are going to be available on our website for you to watch and share. This is our contact information. If you have any questions about the evaluation report, or local food sourcing, please feel free to contact myself or Colleen Matz. And then if you have any other 10 cents a meal questions or inquiries, you can contact Wendy Crowley. She's the farm to program consultant at the Michigan Department of Education. She runs the 10 cents a meal program and she'd be happy to help. All right.